The P-38 Lightning was one of World War II's most recognizable fighters, with its twin-boom design and devastating firepower. But behind the glory and combat victories lay deadly secrets that cost pilots their lives. From catastrophic design flaws to controversial missions that changed the rules of war, the Lightning carried shadows darker than any enemy could cast. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about this iconic warbird. The P-38 Lightning had a killer hidden in its DNA, and it struck without warning. When pilots pushed the aircraft into high-speed dives during combat, they encountered a phenomenon that turned their fighter into a coffin: compressibility. The build-up of shockwaves over the wings at high speeds locked the controls solid. Pilots pulled with everything they had, but the yoke wouldn't budge. The Lightning would continue screaming toward the Earth while its pilot sat helpless, watching death approach. Lockheed knew about the problem early on, but solutions came painfully slow. Test pilot Ralph Verdon died in November 1941 when his P-38 disintegrated during a high-speed dive test over Burbank. His aircraft simply tore apart, pieces scattering across California. The crash sent shockwaves through Lockheed, but the Lightning was already in production. Pilots in combat would have to face this demon themselves. The compressibility issue made the P-38 particularly vulnerable during one of the most common combat maneuvers, the diving attack. German and Japanese pilots learned to exploit this weakness. They'd bait Lightning pilots into high-speed pursuits, then pull up sharply. The P-38, unable to follow without risking compressibility lockup, would lose the advantage. Engineers eventually developed dive flaps that helped break up the airflow and give pilots some control back, but the fix came too late for many. Dozens of pilots died not from enemy fire, but from their own aircraft's aerodynamic betrayal. The compressibility problem wasn't fully solved until jet aircraft forced the entire aviation industry to understand transonic flight. But the dive of death wasn't the Lightning's only killer. The cockpit itself held an even more insidious threat that turned every high-altitude mission into frozen hell. At 30,000 feet over Europe, the temperature inside a P-38 cockpit could drop to 40 degrees below zero. Pilots weren't just fighting the enemy, they were fighting hypothermia and frostbite while trying to fly complex combat missions. The Lightning's heating system was catastrophically inadequate, and Lockheed knew it. Early models had virtually no cockpit heating at all, and when engineers finally added heaters, they were woefully underpowered for the altitudes where the P-38 fought. Pilots reported losing feeling in their hands and feet during extended missions. Some couldn't grip their controls properly. Others suffered frostbite on their faces despite oxygen masks. The cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was deadly. A pilot with frozen fingers couldn't react quickly enough in combat. Slower reaction times meant death. In the brutal calculus of aerial warfare, the P-38's cockpit was killing American pilots before enemy fighters ever got close. The problem was rooted in the Lightning's unique design. The cockpit sat in the center pod between the engines, isolated from any heat source. The twin-boom configuration that made the P-38 so distinctive also made it nearly impossible to effectively heat the pilot's compartment. Engine heat couldn't be routed efficiently, and the cramped nacelle left no room for adequate insulation. European theater commanders complained bitterly. The 8th Air Force tried to use P-38s for high-altitude bomber escort, but pilots came back with frostbite injuries that grounded them for weeks. Some suffered permanent damage to fingers and toes. Medical officers documented case after case of cold-related injuries that never should have happened. The Lightning was supposed to protect American bombers, but it was maiming its own pilots instead. Lockheed scrambled to fix the problem with improved heating systems and better insulation, but the modifications were complex and time-consuming. Meanwhile, Pilots continued suffering in frozen cockpits, their effectiveness compromised on every mission. The cold also affected the aircraft's systems. Guns jammed, instruments malfunctioned, and hydraulic fluid thickened to the consistency of molasses. Yet even as pilots battled the cold, another danger lurked within the Lightning's engines, ready to turn the aircraft into a fireball. The P-38's Allison V-1710 engines were temperamental beasts that could kill as quickly as any enemy fighter. The Lightning used counter-rotating engines. The left engine turned one direction, the right engine turned the other. This eliminated torque issues but created a maintenance nightmare. Mechanics had to stock different parts for each engine, and pilots had to master asymmetric handling that could flip the aircraft into an uncontrollable spin if they made one wrong move. Engine failures happened with terrifying frequency. The Allison engines, pushed to their limits in combat conditions, would simply quit without warning. Coolant systems failed, oil lines ruptured. Turbo superchargers, essential for high-altitude performance, broke down constantly. When an engine failed during takeoff or landing, the asymmetric thrust could slam the P-38 into the ground before the pilot could react. The counter-rotating configuration meant that losing one engine created handling characteristics that differed depending on which engine died. But engine failure was just the beginning. The real terror came when engines caught fire. The Allison V-1710s were prone to internal fires, especially when pushed hard during combat. Pilots would see flames erupting from the engine nacelle, spreading rapidly toward the fuel tanks. The P-38 carried fuel in the wings close to those engines. Once fire started, pilots had seconds to decide: bail out or try to save the aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Jenkins watched his wingman's P-38 explode over Germany when an engine fire reached the fuel tanks. The aircraft simply disintegrated, pieces tumbling through the sky. No parachute, no chance. Jenkins counted 13 similar incidents in his squadron alone during 6 months of combat. The Allison engines weren't just unreliable, they were bombs waiting to explode. Mechanics worked around the clock trying to prevent failures, but combat conditions destroyed engines faster than maintenance could preserve them. Desert sand in North Africa infiltrated everything, grinding engine components to failure. European moisture caused electrical problems that led to fires. Pacific humidity corroded fuel lines until they burst. The P-38 was fighting a war on two fronts, against the enemy and against its own power plants. Lockheed issued technical bulletins and modification orders, but many P-38s in combat squadrons never received the upgrades. Pilots flew with engines they couldn't trust, knowing that mechanical failure might kill them before the enemy ever fired a shot. The engine problems contributed to a loss rate that exceeded combat casualties in some units. Yet despite these deadly mechanical failures, perhaps the Lightning's most persistent secret was the lie that made it famous, a myth that persists to this day. Every history book repeats it. German pilots called the P-38 der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. American propaganda loved this nickname, spreading it through newsreels and magazine articles. It made the Lightning sound terrifying, a demon that struck fear into Nazi hearts. There's just one problem. There's virtually no evidence that German pilots actually called it that. The nickname appears to be Allied propaganda, a fabrication designed to boost morale and sell war bonds. Researchers who've examined captured German documents, interrogation reports, and Luftwaffe pilot accounts find almost no mention of fork-tailed devil. German pilots had their own names for Allied aircraft, usually straightforward descriptions. They called the P-47 Die Jug, the Jug, the B-17 Der Wehrmacht, 4-engine, and the P-51 Der Cadillac. Why would they suddenly get poetic about the P-38? They wouldn't. The myth likely originated from American intelligence officers or public relations specialists who wanted to create an intimidating image. By 1943, the P-38 needed positive publicity. The aircraft had serious problems, the compressibility issues, the frozen cockpits, the engine failures. American newspapers were starting to report on these difficulties. What better way to counter negative press than to claim the enemy feared the lightning so much they gave it a demonic nickname? One possible origin traces to a single propaganda leaflet dropped over Italy that mentioned the phrase. From there, American war correspondents picked it up and ran with it. Within months, the fork-tailed devil nickname appeared everywhere: newsreels, recruiting posters, magazine covers. The lightning became wrapped in mythology that had little connection to reality. German pilots, meanwhile, often preferred engaging P-38s over the superior P-51 Mustang, which had better high-altitude performance and didn't suffer from compressibility problems. Some aviation historians argue that a few German pilots might have used the term informally, but there's no documentation. What is documented is how effectively the myth served American propaganda purposes. It transformed a troubled aircraft into a legend, boosting public support for the war effort and making heroes of P-38 pilots who were actually struggling with serious aircraft deficiencies. The truth is that German pilots respected the P-38's firepower. All guns concentrated in the nose meant devastating accuracy, but they didn't fear it more than other Allied fighters. The fork-tailed devil was a marketing success, not a battlefield reality. Yet propaganda myths pale compared to actual battlefield tragedies, including one that cost American lives because of the lightning's distinctive shape. The P-38's distinctive twin-boom silhouette made it instantly recognizable, and that nearly proved fatal for American pilots. In the chaos of combat, that unique shape led to catastrophic friendly fire incidents that killed Americans and destroyed the aircraft meant to protect them. Allied gunners, nervous and trigger-happy, saw the twin booms and twin tails and mistook them for enemy aircraft. The result was tragedy, written across multiple theaters of war. The most devastating incidents occurred in the Mediterranean theater. Navy ships were notorious for firing at anything with twin engines and twin vertical stabilizers. Several P-38s were shot down by American destroyers and cruisers that mistook them for German aircraft. Pilots survived enemy fighters only to be killed by their own Navy's anti-aircraft fire. The incidents became so common that P-38 units began avoiding friendly ships whenever possible, which complicated escort and patrol missions. But naval gunners weren't the only culprits. Army anti-aircraft batteries shot down P-38s with alarming frequency. During the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, American AA guns destroyed multiple P-38s. Pilots reported being fired upon by friendly forces more often than they engaged enemy aircraft. The psychological impact was devastating. Pilots had to worry about their own side killing them, adding stress to already dangerous missions. The identification problem stemmed from inadequate training and the lightning's unfortunate resemblance to certain German aircraft when seen from specific angles. The Focke-Wulf FW-189, a German reconnaissance aircraft, had a similar twin-boom configuration. In the split-second decisions of combat, nervous gunners saw twin booms and fired first, identifying later. By then, American pilots were already dead. Lockheed and the Army Air Forces tried desperate measures to solve the problem. They painted P-38s with distinctive markings, white stripes, invasion bands, bright colors, anything to make them obviously friendly. Intelligence officers conducted intensive aircraft identification training. They showed gunners hundreds of silhouettes, drilled recognition until it became automatic. Nothing worked completely. The friendly fire continued. One of the most tragic incidents involved a P-38 returning from a successful combat mission over Italy, low on fuel and battle-damaged. As the pilot approached his own airfield, American anti-aircraft gunners opened fire. The pilot desperately tried to signal his identity, rocking his wings and firing recognition flares. The AA fire continued, shredding his aircraft. He crashed just short of the runway, killed by his own countrymen within sight of safety. His squadron mates watched helplessly, unable to stop the tragedy unfolding before their eyes. The friendly fire problem damaged morale and operational effectiveness. Pilots became hesitant to fly near friendly forces, which limited tactical options. Some P-38 units requested transfers to different aircraft, anything to escape the double danger of enemy fire and friendly fire. The Lightning's greatest recognition feature, its unique shape, had become a liability. Yet even these friendly fire tragedies don't compare to the most controversial mission the P-38 ever flew, an assassination that changed the rules of warfare forever. On April 18, 1943, 16 P-38 Lightnings took off from Guadalcanal on a mission unlike any other in military history. A targeted assassination of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack and Japan's most brilliant naval strategist. American codebreakers had intercepted details of Yamamoto's inspection tour, including exact flight times and routes. What followed was a meticulously planned execution that crossed moral and legal boundaries, setting precedents that haunt modern warfare. The mission required extreme long-range navigation. P-38s had to fly over 400 miles of open ocean, maintain radio silence, time their arrival to the exact minute, and intercept Yamamoto's aircraft at a precise location, all while staying below radar detection. Any mistake meant failure or death. The pilots flew barely above the waves, navigating by compass and dead reckoning, with no room for error. One navigation mistake would leave them lost over the Pacific with insufficient fuel to return. Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber spotted the two Betty bombers carrying Yamamoto and his staff, escorted by 6 Zero fighters. The Lightnings climbed to attack. In the furious combat that followed, both Betty bombers were shot down. Yamamoto's aircraft crashed into the jungle. When Japanese search parties found the wreckage, they discovered Yamamoto's body still strapped in his seat, killed by gunfire that struck him during the attack. The architect of Pearl Harbor was dead. But the assassination opened ethical questions that military and political leaders still debate. Was it legal to specifically target a military commander? Did it constitute assassination, which was prohibited by international law and American military tradition? President Roosevelt and military commanders justified the action as a legitimate military operation against an enemy commander in a combat zone. Critics argued it set a dangerous precedent. If targeting specific individuals was acceptable, where did the line stop? The debate continues today. Military historians argue whether the Yamamoto mission shortened the war or simply escalated the brutality. Legal scholars debate whether it violated international law or established legitimate precedent. What's certain is that 18 P-38 pilots flew into combat that day, and the world of warfare changed forever. The P-38 Lightning wasn't just an aircraft, it was a collection of deadly secrets, design flaws, and controversial missions that shaped World War II in ways history often ignores. From pilots frozen in their cockpits to assassinations that changed warfare, the Lightning's true story is darker and more complex than the legend. Keep watching our Vintage Planes channel for more untold stories that reveal what really happened in the skies over the greatest conflict in human history.